Hey guys, this is D Flash and I'm back with another video. This time around we're going to take a look at the mastering process. I've been mastering for about a year now, doing tracks for my label and also for some friends, and people have been very happy with the results, so I figured it'd be nice to share some of the process and hopefully it'll help you either get into mastering or even just add that little bit of polish on your own tracks if you're trying to shop them around and get them heard. So what we've got here is a track from Chemical Harmony. It's a drum and bass track, and I've already mastered it, but I'm going to go through it again so you guys can see what I did to it. So let's take a listen and then we'll take a look at it.
That's it.
Alright, so you can see it's a good track. So we're going to throw ozone on it and take a look at it. First thing I like to check for is just to see how the levels are. You can see from looking at the waveform that they sent over a lot of headroom, which is exactly what you want when you're mastering. You want to have some headroom to add things like an exciter or use the equalizer to boost some frequencies. If you don't have that headroom, you're not going to get as nice of a sound. And you may have to try to lower the signal first or add some expansion to it. So this one is very good. Then the next thing I usually check for is how the side channels are on the EQs. You don't want to have a lot of low frequencies in your side channels. So what I usually do is just take a look in the mid side. We'll skip ahead. You can see here that they did a really good job of leaving the lows out of the side. You want the lows out of the side so that when you're hitting those low frequencies, both speakers are hitting at exactly the same time. What that does is it gives it more of that punch sound that you're looking for. So this, we don't need to do any sort of mid-side processing, so I just did some general EQing. What I like to do first is just roll off some of the lows using the low shelf. So I'll just take down a dB and give it a tight Q. And what that does is it just, not many speakers can generate sub-frequencies below 30 Hertz. Not many can even do them below 40 Hertz well. So by doing that, you free up some of the energy for the lower the frequency, the harder a speaker has to work to create it. So by lowering how much is coming out of the deep lows that can't usually be heard, you give more energy to the speakers to produce things in the 40s, the 60s, and that punchy bass that you're looking for. So I'm going to process this while listening to the track, and we can take a look at it.
You got it.
So what we did here is we boosted the meat of the kick of the sub bass, and then we boosted it up an octave higher. We boosted it also 1 dB, and we use a lighter Q, larger Q or width here, so that it kind of slopes down into the rest of the track. So what we did here is we boosted up a little bit more of the mids and then lowered some of the harsh sounds that were around the 4000 hertz. And that works nicely because when you start, the more you turn up a track, the more those harsh sounds are going to start to show through and can actually sound poorly. Then at the end, I usually put a nice flat low pass filter just to roll everything off. So we'll see where we want to put that. Another reason why I did that was you want the track to, you want to try to get the idea of what they're trying to go for with the sound of the track. And with this, I could tell that they kind of wanted to go with that classic liquid drum and bass sound. And those tracks don't have, a lot of newer tracks now have a lot more highs and the hi-hats are very crisp, whereas the older stuff didn't quite get that yet, because variety of different reasons, but most of the reasons is that they're sampled sounds and the sampling rate was a lot lower then, so you don't get that crispness that a lot of newer tracks have. So by rolling off those highs, you're going to get it more close to some of the older drum and bass sounds that is the more classic sound. Another thing that I like to do when I'm mastering a track is find something that I like the way it sounds and think that it's a similar vibe to what they're going for. So I have another track here. It's an older track from Blue Sonics, and you can hear kind of the similar sound and similar vibe. So you hear how the hi-hats aren't as crisp, they aren't as almost harsh in that track, and that's kind of the vibe that I was going for when I was mastering this. So the next step that I usually do, I usually skip right over reverb. Most tracks have the amount of reverb that they need. That's more useful if you're mastering like an actual band, but for electronic music you don't usually need to mess with that. But I go right to the harmonic exciter, and I usually use tube or tape instead of tube, and I'll just kind of tweak these as needed until I get the sound that I'm looking for. What the exciter does is it adds just that little bit of saturation to the track to give it a little bit more of a vintage feel, well, not a vintage feel, but just a little bit of saturation to give it that polished sound that you normally hear. So we're going to take a listen to the track and I'll start adding to that.
Now you're talking. You got it.
And I like to solo each section just to hear how it sounds alone. You can hear what it's doing here is it's just adding that little bit of saturation to it. And that sounds like the right spot.
Your sense of feeling with your audience. What is your audience telling you? How they grooving, 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 grooving.
And the other thing with the exciter is it can work as a tool for boosting some sections, because as you're adding that saturation, it's becoming more, it's standing out of the track a little bit more, and it's becoming a little bit louder. So you can actually use it as a tool to kind of boost different sections that you need. For this track, we didn't need to do any sort of multi-band dynamics or compression on it. and the stereo imaging was actually very good. I like to take a look at it at least when I'm working on a track and see how it is.
Now you're talking. You got it.
And I'll solo each section. Like we said, you can see that the lows are exactly where they need to be, right in the middle. And they've got plenty of stereo imaging. There's no need to mess with the post equalizer. Everything's pretty good right now. And then I'll just add the maximizer to it. And what the maximizer does is it works kind of like a compressor and a limiter. It brings the track, it keeps the track from going over a certain point, and that's where the margin is. So we put that to minus 0.3. And the threshold is where it's going to start kicking in. And then your character is kind of like the release time. It's how fast it's going to recover from that. And then we have our dithering, and we usually just turn that right on. I just leave it at what it's set to and turn on the DC filter. So now we're going to, the mode that I usually like to use, either IRC2 or IRC3. For this one I used IRC2. And they give you a little description on what the characteristics of it is. Just that this was the first one that they created, this was the second one they created, and this was the third. So they all have different sounds, but I prefer IRC2. So what I normally do is just
Now you're talking. You got it.
bring down the threshold. And that's pretty much all that we needed to do with this track. It was a fun track to master because there wasn't much to fix. It was just bringing out the elements that they liked and that I thought sounded really good. The other thing with the maximizer is, this one I didn't squash the track. I could tell that they wanted to have that vintage feel where it's not over compressed, it's not squashed. So I shot for an RMS level, which is your I believe it stands for root mean square, but mainly it's your average sound volume level. And I shot for between -6 and -3, and I think at most parts it's hovering around -5. And that's a good spot to be if you want to have a lot of dynamics to the track still and have things jump out of the track. But yeah, that's pretty much how I approach mastering. I just go down the chain and then go back and tweak things if something sounds off after that. Keep comparing it to other tracks, and as you get better at it, you start to notice what sounds good and what you like and what other people like and what stands out to them. So I hope this was helpful to you. If you have any tips or questions, feel free to leave them in the comments. And thanks for checking out the video.